and narrative change in very different ways and in very with enormous repercussions from casting, from funding, from the creative, from producing. And as we dive into this conversation, we also have to ask, like, what exactly does narrative change mean? And how do you affect it in your work?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
We scripted that a little bit, but it's okay.
We did.
I just kind of forgot. Hey, everyone. I'm just really happy to be here at the Sunrise House, which is particularly just like special and inspiring because I think, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this house would not have existed here at Sundance. And I'm really glad that it does. But when I think about defining narrative change, for me, I tend to look at it through a very personal lens, which is thinking about the kinds of content that I had growing up and the kinds of stories that impacted me and taught me about the world. And I think, if I'm going to be honest about it, a lot of the popular culture that I had growing up as a South Asian American kid here was centered around generally white voices, generally white male voices. And that had a pretty significant impact on my self-esteem, my self-worth as a kid. I've realized much later in life, I was a big bookworm growing up, and I'd spend a lot of my time in the library and read a lot. But because I was so influenced by everything I saw around me when it came to movies and shows, when I envisioned the protagonists of the novels that I was reading in my imagination, I envisioned them as whites. I never envisioned that someone like me, or that looked like me, or looked like my family, could be the hero of a story. That's really sad. And so when I think about narrative change, I think for me, it's, as a producer, putting the limited bandwidth, time, resources, energy, effort that I have into telling stories that I believe will impact that next generation, so that they have people to look at and can actually, I think we all talk about seeing ourselves on screen, but I don't what people don't think about is just how much that impacts how you move through the world and your ability to take up space in the world. And so I think that for me is the primary goal of narrative change.
I also think the stories that we tell have the ability to affect others too, and how they view our communities as well. And so for me, that's a really powerful part of it. And in addition, stories have this crazy power to really affect change. And so for me, my very first job was working for Jonathan Demme on a documentary on Haiti. And we ended up using that documentary to show to Bill Clinton to affect policy surrounding Guantanamo and the illegal detention of Haitian refugees. And so from a very early point, I really understood the power that story has. And that's just sort of been something that I've carried through my life. And now with some of the work that I'm doing at Rideback, or I've been doing at Rideback, and I don't know if we're going to get into what we're specifically doing or how we're approaching it, but we have a bit of a differentiated view on how we're going about the work. We're focused on, we're empowering and supporting BIPOC creators who want to tell mainstream stories that in their own personal voice that better reflect society. And so our specific mandate is to focus on people that are mid-career, which oftentimes other programs do focus on people that are just starting out. So we're differentiated in that point from that perspective. But also in the idea of working on mainstream stories that can go out broadly to help affect change. That's a big component as well. Obviously, there's a lot of other organizations that support stories that are more personal, or and our stories are also personal but also commercial, but stories that might not go out more broadly and that are really important as well to get out into the world and for people to consume. But our focus is specifically on stuff that can go out broadly. We are also focused on really. In the program, we have fellows and residents. It's a year-long program, developing a new story or piece of content that they want to make that we can help get out into the world. And the idea is really to take the risk associated that studios view as risky, the development process. That's where people are meant to put in money. And you don't know, okay, this could either be good, it could be bad. So we're sort of taking on that risk in the sort of pipeline and creating a pipeline of talent.
I know I only just met you and Rishi 5 minutes ago, but so much of what you're saying really resonates with me from being a bookworm and not seeing yourself, and from working in a broad space where you're supplying content and creating content for broader audiences. And when I think about narrative change, I start sort of examining the question itself. I mean, who is controlling the narrative? And how are we defining this narrative? I mean, that was really what got me, like, really kind of thinking a lot about this very late last night. And when you think about it, the existing defining narrative that is out there right now, like, is it really taking into account all of our narratives? And if it's not doing that, it's not telling a whole story. So a lot of what I try to do on a daily basis is sort of bring myself into what I'm doing as we're working in sometimes a broader space and wanting to bring rich stories into that space, and sort of like bringing like all of that of myself into that workplace.
Now, I'm just going to encourage everyone to hold the mic up so you can hear.
Sorry.
And Kashif, I want you to jump in as well. But something that's occurred to me as you've been talking, now we're in this kind of pivotal moment. We're in a portal moment at the beginning of this year, coming off the heels of a year full of uncertainty. Like, we do have to be realistic about the possibilities for narrative change. We had the strikes, which went on for months and months. We had the recession within the industry, the cutbacks, the layoffs, the elimination of DEI units and roles. And so when you talk about the importance of, like, if you can see it, then you can be it. Like, Rishi, when you were a kid, I remember when I was a kid, I had no role models to look for having brown people on screen. I mean, there was maybe Persis Kambata in Star Trek. But there wasn't much that I could look to that would inspire me. And that's why I think houses like this are so important, is because they show people that we are here and that our stories matter. But thinking about this pivotal portal moment and also the uncertainty that we're coming from, like, where can we see ourselves going?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. It's always a little interesting for me to be on panels like this because I kind of sit outside of the sort of the entertainment world. I work primarily sort of in philanthropy. And so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, obviously the uncertainty that you're referencing is very real. But I think a lot about our work. So I co-founded and run an organization called the Pillars Fund, which is supporting Muslim communities around the country. We have an entire program that we launched with Riz Ahmed and Rami Youssef and Sana Amanat and a few others that is sort of finding the next sort of generation of Muslim voices to be able to tell their stories. Partly because, you know, it's not just the narrative truth that you reference is so true, is because it's not just sort of combating this sort of like false narrative. It's also sort of empowering and telling the stories of the communities that we come from, which is, that's so sort of diverse around sort of racial lines, gender lines, sexuality, all of these different spaces. And so to your question, I think the thing that I think a lot about is I've been really inspired by Ava DuVernay's Origin. I was able to go to be at the New York premiere of it. And I think what she sort of really figured out is sort of leveraging outside sources of financing, which is, I know, just one part of sort of the equation. But I do think that what's happening right now is that there are sort of creative ways to think about to get our stories out into the world. And I think we need to really start thinking a lot more about that. There are, people like Mackenzie Scott, for example, who has sort of primarily been giving to like nonprofit organizations billions of dollars. But I do think that there's opportunities right now to talk about the ways in which narratives like shape all of the work that's happening in the civic sector. We're talking, like my work is sort of spans not just in the entertainment space, but we're also doing a lot of work around election in voting for 2024, which is, I don't know if you guys know, a very scary election. But these things work together. And I think that it's really important for us to think about ways in which like we can kind of think outside of the box a little bit, because what we're seeing, it's not to be pessimistic. What we're seeing is sort of this this real far right wing attack on diversity and inclusion in general. Don't get it twisted. It's not just about sort of, the sort of pressure of getting Claudine Gay fired from Harvard was sort of like just the beginning of, I think, of this domino effect. And I don't say that to be negative. I say that because this is a moment for us to organize and actually think about our allies in different ways. And so that's how we've been thinking about it. Even spending, a lot of my time has been spent working with a lot of Muslim, tech leaders, thinking who have a lot of resources, but aren't in rooms like this. But I think would be the one thing that Hollywood I think has is that people are generally enamored by these stories. They want, it's like whether it be celebrities, whether it be these stories, they want to see themselves in some ways. And so these stories or these people that I'm meeting with, they're very excited to sort of think about ways to engage. And so that to me is what excites me about the year, even though it's not to be Pollyannish. I am obviously worried, but I do think that I believe in our resilience, deeply.
I mean, I'm going to ask a question, sorry. But I'm sort of curious because, it's amazing what Ava has been able to do with Origin. But for many of the filmmakers here, they don't, she's Ava.
Yeah.
And so, so I guess my worry is just about how we all are able to move forward with distribution, right? Because I think we do need to start thinking about alternative distribution channels and platforms, and how are those going to come together? How are we going to organize to make those things a reality so that our stories really can get out there if it does come to pass that other people aren't making them? Question? Sorry. That was a question.
I could just add to that a little bit. What the issues that we're seeing around us are very real, and we do kind of have to support each other as a community. Those DEI roles that may not be there anymore, that was so additive in the studio and network system, and those of us who are still working in those spaces, the importance of leaning into that. I'm not a DE&I executive, but it's just naturally part of how I do my job, and I kind of think we all have to do our part in order for these projects to get going. I may sit far away from you as it relates in the world and what we do day to day, but without the others out there fighting for us and championing us, those that are here, we really need to sort of double down on it.
And Claudia, I'd love for you, because when we were talking in advance of this, you were mentioning some of the initiatives that you lead. And I think it would be great for people to hear about specific ways in which we are building allies, in which we are changing the ways that narratives get out there.
Yeah, here's the thing. These studio and network systems, they've been working sort of the same way for so many years since they were created. And when they were created, they were not created to serve underrepresented communities. They were, again, created to support the dominant narrative, going back to the business of narrative change. And something that I do at work is I work on several initiatives. And, I don't want initiative also, I keep hearing a little bit almost like a negative knock on the word initiative these days. So I've expanded upon it as well, and I like to call them initiatives and activations, because they're activated and we have very real results that we want to attain. So I work very closely in putting on a showcase that comes out of the CBS network for underrepresented performers who may not have the opportunity to get in front of some of the development execs and producers, and we put that on every year. We do it for the whole company too. So it comes out of the CBS Entertainment division, but it is for all of Paramount Global. And that's something that even predates me, and we continue to do that every year. We're doing our next one on February 1st. And in the midst of all the seismic change and shifting that was going on, and when we weren't able to cast roles, my department really, again, leaned into who are we not looking at, and who are we not lifting up, and who are we not bringing through the door? And we really took a look at the disability space, and when we weren't able to cast roles and do that part of our jobs, we built a database and initiative in order to support performers with disabilities, and it came about very organically because there was so much work to do in that space, and now it's just become part of our jobs, which is always the goal, is for it to just be part of how we do the jobs. Because if we're not letting everyone into the net, like what are we actually doing? We're not doing our jobs. So those are just a few of the programs that my team and I are working with. Yeah.
To jump in from the producer side, I think, having had to go through what was a really painful year last year during the strike and having to kind of like really help guide Hillman Grad through that process and trying to just literally stay alive and stay afloat as a company full of people of color, and looking around at all of our contemporaries that were all companies that, happen to be the companies that include people of color that were all really suffering during that time, and going, all right, it feels like the diversity renaissance, the diversity experiment is over, right? That Hollywood had decided that they don't want to take risks on diverse projects. Everything's going to shrink. There's going to be less money available. There's not going to be people, DEI executives within companies that are really there. And it was a kind of sobering moment in time for us. But I think within kind of these times of kind of difficulty, I think we see opportunity also come about. And I think that opportunity is very ripe and well here at the Sundance Film Festival, because I think there's a massive opportunity in independent film. And in a moment where studios and networks are afraid to take those risks in those filmmakers, we've really put an emphasis on lower budget productions and going, okay, what is that sweet spot of $5 to $7 million budget movies from underrepresented filmmakers, writer-directors, things that have the opportunity for breakout potential? We're talking about genre, we're talking about horror, thriller, talking about broader movies and projects as you're referencing. And how do we just be really smart about it? How do we get scrappy? How do we continue to fight for our people and help get to those audiences specifically? I know that we can't rely on studios to market our projects appropriately and correctly. That's a problem I've had on almost every single project I've been part of. And so I think within this moment, I've been really happy to see that it's like the resistance is building, in that we're entering like a different part of the cycle, and we have to dig in our heels and fight for each other and fight for those filmmakers that Hollywood is going to say doesn't have the chops, doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the resources, those actors that don't have the credentials, and we're in the kind of positions that we are all in on this stage. I think we have to be the ones to build support systems around those individuals. And I think like saying an actor has gone through the CBS Diversity Workshop already makes them more appealing to a casting director. I have had the fortunate opportunity to work on a program called Rising Voices, which is sponsored by Indeed, in which we give filmmakers $100,000 each to make a short film. They come out of that program having run a full production and been produced and mentored under Hillman Grad. All of a sudden, they're now more appealing and less risky. And so we're having to find the loopholes. We're having to find like the ways that we can break people in and kick down the doors. And it's not going to be easy, but I think the moment that we're in right now is a very, very pivotal one, and it's one where we need to kind of force our position and stay here.
Actually, one of our residents is one of the Indeed.
Omar.
Shout
out Omar.
So shout out to Omar, who I think.
There he is.
All right. There's Omar. One of our residents has gotten that, which is amazing. And so what we're really focused on as well is about building community, because part of it is like, oftentimes we're all working separately in these sort of small silos, and also silos across, across different organizations. So, for example, we did an executive event with CAPE and NALEAP and MPAC and Storyline Partners to bring together all the diverse executives in Hollywood and to do a panel about how do we, navigate this moment, which was really important because also a lot of us don't know who everyone else is. So part of bringing together community and getting people to sort of because that's one of the things is we don't have enough diverse execs, as we all know. So making sure we maintain the people we have and try to keep adding it is a really important thing. And so doing these executive events is really critical, as well as creating community. So we had over 400 people apply to the fellowship program, and we picked 5 fellows, each of whom get up 50 grand for the year, and up to 25 grand to option IP, because as we know, IP is important, and or create visual proof of concepts. So, and then we also have 10 residents who each get $10,000 as well, and a whole year-long curriculum of development through sort of a Pixar brain trust kind of model where they're working with showrunners to develop both TV. We're doing TV and film. So we're trying to create this community. So in addition to these 15 people, we also selected 200 people who are in our circle, which is a larger community of folks who are doing, curriculum for those folks. But it's actually been so cool to see how everyone's connected and are doing things together, and how much people really craved that community.
Well, there's also so much intersectionality in all of our spaces. There, I mean, I went to that event; it was amazing. And,
I did too.
and just there's something about harnessing the power of all of our underrepresented communities. Like, we're not in competition with one another; we're each other's partners out here.
Well, it's very hard to foster that abundance mindset, especially when you are from those communities that have been historically marginalized, because your truths are so threatening to those who are in positions of power. So I'm curious, on a personal level, how do y'all find the tenacity and the joy in what you do?
I mean, I think about it like it's like one thing that's always interesting about communities of color is like we don't really have a choice. The work that we do is sort of so, it's like when you were talking about that representation that you didn't see, like I think about this all the time. Like when I was, like, my parents are immigrants from Pakistan, and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and there was like so many things. Like I learned about what prom was from like a Full House episode. Like I didn't actually know what prom was, and I'm really glad I did, because I would have seemed like if I went to school, I'd been like, I don't even know what this thing is. And so I really think about like how it's, to me, I'm completely, and I think so many of us are like totally shaped by the art and the culture that we consumed. And so for us, to me, like, regardless of what the obstacles might be, I think the joy will always be there, because I really do believe in this medium as a way to actually change the ways in which like this country can actually like fulfill the things that we should be doing. And so I think a lot about the way, like, even when I grew up, my activism really came in a post 9/11 world. I was an 18-year-old kid, Muslim kid from Ohio, and it shaped everything, because there was so many. It wasn't just that there was like these terrorist tropes. It was like the thing that was so frustrating was that like the tropes are not just about terrorism and national security. It's about, there's like such an abundance of like diverse voices within Muslim communities that people just don't hear about. Like you hear about like, how like, there's like this narrative about how we're very anti-LGBTQ, and like we're all these things, and like there's some of the most incredible artists and amazing people I've met have been queer Muslims, like organizing within our communities. And so like for me, the thing that keeps me going is like I feel like I am a part of this like really incredible community, and I kind of just want to show the world like the abundance of talent and all the stories that have to be told. So that's what keeps me going. I think that there's I don't think I have a choice, but beyond that, I think that I really believe that all of us, like if our work continues to happen, this country will be a dramatically different place for the better in the next 50, 100 years. We may not see it in our lifetime, but I really do believe that.
Yes. Well, it reminds me of something that a friend of mine said when I was feeling particularly low, and it just seemed, I said to her, the bad guys always win. And she responded, but the storytellers also win. And what y'all are talking about is how to support storytellers. And I'm hearing community, financial resourcing, but going back to like, how do you find the tenacity to do what you do when the forces are so against that change?
I mean, it's crazy because the job is so hard. Like, we get told no like 99 times out of 100, and there are days where it's like, maybe I should have gone to Wall Street. Like, I don't know. like maybe I should have done that.
My
But
mother still asks me when I'm going to go to law school.
right, totally.
She's like, what do you do?
But it's so that when you get in the room with the community that you've made a piece of content for, all of a sudden it makes like the years and years and the pain and all of it so worthwhile. I think even in the past year, at Hillman Grad, remember we did a film called Shank and Dunk for Disney Plus with a filmmaker named Jing Yi Shao. And I remember being in a focus group screening for that movie with Disney, and we were so, worried because we didn't know how it was going to play, and we had been sitting in the edit for forever, and it was the first time a group of people were seeing it. And we got to that little focus group, and the sort of like, we were asking like, what was the one word that you would describe this film with? And there was an Asian American guy in the front row who raised his hand and just said, finally. And I think about that. I think about the portrayal of Harlem in 1001 and how many people have felt so seen by that and so seen by Tiana's performance. I think about Kokomo City and the Black trans experience and how much we never get to see the humanity and joy there, and so many people who have felt, again, that their community is finally being represented in a real way. And it's in those moments when we see those projects and all of that coming to fruition, it makes it worthwhile. It makes all of the many hours and the many tears feel like we're here for a reason.
Jumping on that, I started in banking, so I don't recommend that. But also kudos to you, because I grew up in Harlem, and Avi's movie captured the time and place so beautifully. I could touch it and feel it. It was amazing. And so, yeah, this work is so hard, but I can't see myself doing anything else. I mean, I really believe in our 5 fellows and our 10 residents. I love their projects. I want to help them make them happen, make them a reality, and support their careers going forward. I mean, I feel like these are like lifelong, connections, and that's really what motivates me, because I want to see them win.
Mm-hmm. And what y'all are talking about so much is like how to encourage people to learn about the business of being creative, which is something that is not automatic. It's not something that's intuitive. It is something that you need to learn and acquire.
You do need to learn. I mean, so part of the curriculum that we've been doing is, like I said, the brain trust things, where we're in sort of mini writers' rooms going through developing the projects, but also, once a month there's a practical speaker who comes in. Once it might be about short films or, budgeting, and then we also do once a month the studio executive, once a month a production company, so that people are also meeting all these people. So you're building your network as well, and with each other too, because that's we all know that's what matters, like who you know.
Yeah, I mean, my greatest fear as an artist is that no one sees my work, and yet it is quite disheartening when you come to festivals like this and you see so much beautiful work, so much imagination, but as outside of the festival, how will they find their audience?
I also feel like how great that they even exist, because what it takes just to get a piece of work made, like that is a win in itself. And again, I mean, I remember seeing Better Luck Tomorrow at this festival.
Me too.
And the feeling that I had coming out of that screening. I mean, it's kind of comparable to coming here to the Sunrise Collective. It's sort of that same internal feeling. It's kind of magical, and that's why we're all here, is to get the word out on something that we see that touches us.
I tried to buy that film when I was an executive at Paramount Classics, and they all told me I was crazy, but I guess I was right.
You weren't.
Well, and that's the beauty of the Sunrise Collective, is that I think about all the young people, the budding creatives who will come here and see people like them and recognize that there is a community, there is support for that community, and there is a way to amplify that community.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about that, is that I think in our work, and rightfully we get so sort of focused on sort of like the output and the outcomes of our work and ensuring that we're effective and this and that. And I think that sometimes if we were able to just pause and realize the fact that this house exists, Sunrise House exists, you all are doing the work that you're doing. I think the world is already looking dramatically different than it did 20, 30 years ago. And I do think sometimes we, in these moments, in these really heady conversations, you need almost to take a step back and be like, holy shit, there's so much great art in the world that is being seen by more people than we could have imagined. Because it's not like a lot of this wasn't being made 20, 30 years ago. It's just there was no sort of outlet for it. And the fact that we have a long ways to go, I'm not saying that but I do think that, like, you know, just the fact that this conversation's happening, this house is existing, there's a Latinx house, Indigenous house, Muslim house, like here at Sundance. I mean, this is incredible.
And we are beginning, well, obviously we're seeing such diverse stories where we're not either the model minority or the gangster or whatever. We're seeing a lot of rich, diverse stories being told, which is really, really exciting. I do worry about this distribution element because it's great to see these stories, but also we need them to work. We need people to go see them and support them. And so, again, I don't know, anybody out there, let's start a distribution network for these stories.
Well,
So.
yeah, I mean, I've been saying to whomever I feel has influence and can make things like this happen, we need like a group of funders or studio executives who are willing to be loss leaders. Like, it can't only be about making your money back. It can't only be about an investment, because when we lose the storytellers, we lose the witnesses. And we lose our historical and cultural context. And that I feel is just, that will take generations to undo that kind of damage that started happening in recent years. And so it's like, so we have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure to have some action items and takeaways for the audience. Because everyone here becomes an ambassador for the business of narrative change. So I'd like to spend our remaining time together talking about that. Like, what can people do?
I'll just jump in. I mean, I think these times are again incredibly challenging, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to sort of take that power and don't wait for someone to give you something. Go out and create your own opportunity and find your peers and be a part of this community here and outside. But I'm kind of done waiting. I think it's on us now to put our work out there and to use our relationships to get things seen and made.
If I'm gonna critique our community for a moment, I think a thing that I've noticed in terms of content coming out is that a lot of times our community doesn't show up for something until white people say it's good.
Whoa.
And I'm kind of tired of that. I'm kind of tired of people watching things and not screaming from the rooftops about them. I'm kind of tired of our community not showing up for each other. And I think there's also so many more intersectional stories to be told. I think about the fact that at Hillman Grad, I definitely want to be supporting more disabled stories. I want to be supporting more indigenous stories. I want to be supporting more Palestinian storytellers. I want to be doing a lot better of a job in terms of even sort of like the power and advocacy that we have within our community, helping to uplift other communities as well.
I definitely want us to get away from that siloed approach and to really be supporting each other. You know, from this first year, like, obviously there's so much work to be done in terms of who applied to the program, what were the numbers like, you know, what were the percentages. You know, I would love for more Muslim American people to apply to the program. You know, actually, as Zeba brought to my attention, you know, the majority of Muslims in America are African American. Yeah. I want to see those stories too. So I think, like, I want to see more Native American people apply to this program. And I think the great news is that since we've done this first tranche, hopefully people have gotten the word out to more people, and we'll have even more people apply for next time.
Well, that makes me think of something I heard in the spectacular conversation between Daniel Day Kim and Lucy Liu early today. How many of you were here for that? Just spectacular. And one of the things that Lucy said that really resonated was, you can't be fed if your mouth is closed. And I think about these programs that you've initiated and wanting more diverse applicants and from specific communities. So much of it is you can't expect people to find you. Yeah. So how do you find them? Like, how do you do that outreach?
So I want to say two things about that real quick. I'm really glad that you said that. It's because I was really like our first fellowship class. Well, I was really proud of it, but it wasn't perfect. I mean, I think we needed to do a better job of doing outreach into the communities that we were talking about. But I think that, but to your point, I think what's really, really important in the ways in which we were able to do that is we have a long, like, decade-long history of like building authentic relationships with like a lot of different communities. And I think that, like, to your point, it's not just sort of, I think it's not just sort of showing up, it's also like building like non-transactional relationships with like lots of different like people in this room. And I think about that so frequently because of what's happening in this moment right now, of like how many Palestinian voices have been silenced. They have no, like it is sort of a, like I know someone who's lost over 30 family members in Gaza. And so, and the fact that there is still sort of this like ability to kind of maybe not want to say that out loud, of fear of repercussion, et cetera. I think to me, this is about sort of building like real, like I know the people who have sort of really come to us in the last couple of months, and I'm not Palestinian, by the way, but I have a lot of Palestinian people on staff, and I was actually spent time there, all of these things. And it's so important because I know the people who've sort of authentically sort of called and showed up, and no one always has the answers to these really difficult questions, but I think you always remember the ones that are there for you. You always remember the ones that show up, and I think that that's what I mean by like really sort of building those relationships and showing up for people. And I'm not saying I've always done it well and perfectly, and I think that we all, like I think if we all sort of take a moment, we can do more ourselves, and not just sort of say we need to show up, but also what are the ways that we can do that. So I really appreciate that sentiment, because I do think that we need to be showing up for all of these like incredible stories that are being told. The thing that I always think about, and you all will know this better than I do, because again, I'm not in this space, but sort of that movie, The Sound of Freedom, the what was happening, the galvanizing amongst like Middle America and the ways in which they were sort of doing that. Like at some point, like that, like you were just watching that and being like, holy hell, like there's like a lot of, and there was like strategies that were sort of incorporated that were sort of getting people out there. And so it's not that we can't do things like that. It's, I think we can actually learn a lot from the far right in the ways in which they organize.
Can you say more about that?
I mean, look at I've always used this example, look at the Daily Wire. Like, I think the Daily Wire, I mean, if you look at, I don't want to get on this whole thing because this isn't what the conversation's about, but
and we only have 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I will just say is that I think they're just more, my assessment as someone that sort of spent time sort of understanding these movements is that they're just more willing to take risks and sort of be like, oh, like, I think there's just more willing to be like, this is interesting, we'll put in like $100 million into like Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire to create content online because we see YouTube as a way to sort of, put out information. It's scary stuff, but I do think that there's lessons that we can learn and ways that we can galvanize and sort of organize amongst the things that we want to tell. So
yes, and on that note, it's also about intervening young.
Yes,
before
absolutely.
behaviors and conditioning become ingrained, because that is also something that those who oppose a society in which people inherently belong, who oppose seeing others as human, that's where they succeed, in intervening young. So I think it's also about reaching the young people and making sure that stories do get amplified that will resonate with people. So in our final 2 minutes, I would love to hear from others, like what are some action items, takeaways that we can leave the audience with?
In the spirit of shouting out filmmakers and other projects in this festival, I saw a movie called Dee Dee last night that I loved and I thought so spoke to a very specific experience. And so an action item for me would be for everyone to go see that and shout about it.
Yeah, I agree. Like that, I love the movie too. And again, we should be supporting each other, forming communities, and supporting the films and projects and TV shows that we all make, because I think it will make a real difference. Because that's what the right wing do. They say do this, and everyone supports it, and then it gets amplified. And so I think that's one of the things. And also we need the investing community to really support some of these initiatives, because there are companies like A24, when they started, they weren't making a profit. Mm-hmm. So we need investors to be investing in our businesses as well.
I think it's important also to wake up every day and be a little hopeful and a little optimistic amidst all of what we're seeing happening around us, and think about, I may not be able to change it all myself from where I sit, but what can I do with what I touch every day? And I would encourage you all to ask that of yourselves.
And that is a beautiful note to end on. So tomorrow, please come back. Dee Dee was mentioned a couple of times. And tomorrow, I believe we're going to be celebrating Sean Wang, the filmmaker, correct?
Cool.
Tomorrow afternoon. So please come back for the programming. Stick around for the panels coming up. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you so much to our incredible panel.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So support artists, support the storytellers, and be brave. Thank you. Thank you to Procter & Gamble.